Section 1 of Chapter 12 of Anarchism and Other Essays. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Yearsley. Section 1 of Chapter 12 of Anarchism and Other Essays by Emma Goldman. The Modern Drama, a Powerful Disseminator of Radical Thought. So long as discontent and unrest make themselves but dumbly felt within a limited social class, the powers of reaction may often succeed in suppressing such manifestations. But when the dumb unrest grows into conscious expression and becomes almost universal, it necessarily affects all phases of human thought and action, and seeks its individual and social expression in the gradual transvaluation of existing values. An adequate appreciation of the tremendous spread of the modern conscious social unrest cannot be gained from merely propagandistic literature. Rather must we become conversant with the larger phases of human expression manifest in art, literature, and above all the modern drama, the strongest and most far-reaching interpreter of our deep-felt dissatisfaction. What a tremendous factor for the awakening of conscious discontent are the simple canvases of a Millet. The figures of his peasants, what terrible indictment against our social wrongs, wrongs that condemn the man with the hoe to hopeless drudgery, himself excluded from nature's bounty. The vision of a Meunier conceives the growing solidarity and defiance of labour in the group of miners carrying their maimed brother to safety. His genius thus powerfully portrays the interrelation of the seething unrest among those slaving in the bowels of the earth, and the spiritual revolt that seeks artistic expression. No less important is the factor for rebellious awakening in modern literature. Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Andreyev, Gorky, Whitman, Emerson, and scores of others embodying the spirit of universal ferment and the longing for social change. Still more far-reaching is the modern drama, as the leaven of radical thought and the disseminator of new values. It might seem an exaggeration to ascribe to the modern drama such an important role, but a study of the development of modern ideas in most countries will prove that the drama has succeeded in driving home great social truths generally ignored when presented in other forms. No doubt there are exceptions, as Russia and France. Russia, with its terrible political pressure, has made people think, and has awakened their social sympathies, because of the tremendous contrast which exists between the intellectual life of the people and the despotic regime that is trying to crush that life. Yet while the great dramatic works of Tolstoy, Tchekhov, Gorky, and Andreyev closely mirror the life and the struggle, the hopes and aspirations of the Russian people, they did not influence radical thought to the extent the drama has done in other countries. Who can deny, however, the tremendous influence exerted by The Power of Darkness, or Night Lodging? Tolstoy, the real, true Christian, is yet the greatest enemy of organised Christianity. With a master hand he portrays the destructive effects upon the human mind of the power of darkness, the superstitions of the Christian Church. What other medium could express, with such dramatic force, the responsibility of the Church for crimes committed by its deluded victims? What other medium could, in consequence, rouse the indignation of man's conscience? Similarly direct and powerful is the indictment contained in Gorky's Night Lodging, the social pariahs forced into poverty and crime, yet desperately clutch at the last vestiges of hope and aspiration. Lost existences these, blighted and crushed by cruel, unsocial environment. France, on the other hand, with her continuous struggle for liberty, is indeed the cradle of radical thought. As such, she too did not need the drama as a means of awakening, and yet the works of Brieux, as Robe Rouge, portraying the terrible corruption of the judiciary, and Mirbeau's Les Affaires sont les affaires, picturing the destructive influence of wealth on the human soul, have undoubtedly reached wider circles than most of the articles and books which have been written in France on the social question. In countries like Germany, Scandinavia, England, and even in America, though in a lesser degree, the drama is the vehicle which is really making history, disseminating radical thought in ranks not otherwise to be reached. Let us take Germany, for instance. For nearly a quarter of a century, men of brains, of ideas, and of the greatest integrity made it their life work to spread the truth of human brotherhood, of justice, among the oppressed and downtrodden. Socialism, that tremendous revolutionary wave, was to the victims of a merciless and inhumane system like water to the parched lips of the desert traveller. Alas, the cultured people remained absolutely indifferent. To them that revolutionary tide was but the murmur of dissatisfied, discontented men, dangerous, illiterate troublemakers, whose proper place was behind prison bars. Self-satisfied as the cultured usually are, they could not understand why one should fuss about the fact that thousands of people were starving, though they contributed towards the wealth of the world. Surrounded by beauty and luxury, they could not believe that side by side with them lived human beings degraded to a position lower than a beast's, shelterless and ragged, without hope or ambition. This condition of affairs was particularly pronounced in Germany after the Franco-German War. Full to the bursting point with its victory, Germany thrived on a sentimental, patriotic literature, thereby poisoning the minds of the country's youth by the glory of conquest and bloodshed. Intellectual Germany had to take refuge in the literature of other countries, in the works of Ibsen, Zola, Daudet, Maupassant, and especially in the great works of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Turgenev. But as no country can long maintain a standard of culture without a literature and drama related to its own soil, so Germany gradually began to develop a drama reflecting the life and the struggles of its own people. Arno Holz, one of the youngest dramatists of that period, startled the Philistines out of their ease and comfort with his Familie Selige. The play deals with society's refuse, men and women of the alleys, whose only subsistence consists of what they can pick out of the garbage barrels. A gruesome subject, is it not? And yet what other method is there to break through the hard shell of the minds and souls of people who have never known want, and who therefore assume that all is well in the world? Needless to say, the play aroused tremendous indignation. The truth is bitter, and the people living on the Fifth Avenue of Berlin hated to be confronted with the truth. Not that the Familie Selige represented anything that had not been written about for years without any seeming result, but the dramatic genius of Holz, together with the powerful interpretation of the play, necessarily made inroads into the widest circles, and forced people to think about the terrible inequalities around them. Sudermann's Ehre and Heimat dealt with vital subjects. I have already referred to the sentimental patriotism so completely turning the head of the average German as to create a perverted conception of honour. Duelling became an everyday affair, costing innumerable lives. A great cry was raised against the fad by a number of leading writers, but nothing acted as such a clarifier and exposer of that national disease as the Ehre. Not that the play merely deals with duelling, it analyses the real meaning of honour, proving that it is not a fixed inborn feeling, but that it varies with every people and every epoch, depending particularly on one's economic and social station in life. We realise from this play that the man in the brownstone mansion will necessarily define honour differently from his victims. The family Heinecker enjoys the charity of the millionaire Mühling, being permitted to occupy a dilapidated shanty on his premises in the absence of their son, Robert. The latter, as Mühling's representative, is making a vast fortune for his employer in India. On his return, Robert discovers that his sister had been seduced by young Mühling, whose father graciously offers to straighten matters with a cheque for 40,000 marks. Robert, outraged and indignant, resents the insult to his family's honour, and is forthwith dismissed from his position for impudence. Robert finally throws this accusation into the face of the philanthropist millionaire. "We slave for you, we sacrifice our heart's blood for you, while you seduce our daughters and sisters and kindly pay for their disgrace with the gold we have earnt for you. That is what you call honour." An incidental sidelight upon the conception of honour is given by Count Drast. the principal character in the era, a man widely conversant with the customs of various climes, who relates that in his many travels he chanced across a savage tribe whose honour he mortally offended by refusing the hospitality which offered him the charms of the chieftain's wife. The theme of Heimat treats of the struggle between the old and the young generations. It holds a permanent and important place in dramatic literature. Magda, the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Schwartz, has committed an unpardonable sin. She refused the suitor selected by her father. For daring to disobey the parental commands, she is driven from home. Magda, full of life and the spirit of liberty, goes out into the world, to return to her native town 12 years later, a celebrated singer. She consents to visit her parents on condition that they respect the privacy of her past. But her martinet father immediately begins to question her, insisting on his paternal rights. Magda is indignant, but gradually his persistence brings to light the tragedy of her life. He learns that the respected Councillor von Keller had in his student days been Magda's lover, while she was battling for her economic and social independence. The consequence of the fleeting romance was a child, deserted by the man even before birth. The rigid military father of Magda demands as retribution from Councillor von Keller that he legalise the love affair. In view of Magda's social and professional success, Keller willingly consents, but on condition that she forsake the stage and place the child in an institution. The struggle between the old and the new culminates in Magda's defiant words of the woman grown to conscious independence of thought and action. "I'll say what I think of you and your respectable society. Why should I be worse than you, that I must prolong my existence among you by a lie? Why should this gold upon my body and the lustre which surrounds my name only increase my infamy? Have I not worked early and late for 10 long years? Have I not woven this dress with sleepless nights? Have I not built up my career step by step, like thousands of my kind? Why should I blush before anyone? I am myself, and through myself I have become what I am." The general theme of Heimat was not original. It had been previously treated by a master hand in Fathers and Sons, partly because Turgenev's great work was typical rather of Russian than universal conditions, and still more because it was in the form of fiction. The influence of Fathers and Sons was limited to Russia. But Heimat, especially because of its dramatic expression, became almost a world factor. The dramatist who not only disseminated radicalism, but literally revolutionized the thoughtful Germans, is Gerhard Hauptmann. His first play, For Sonnenaufgang, refused by every leading German theatre, and first performed in a wretched little playhouse behind a beer garden, acted like a stroke of lightning, illuminating the entire social horizon. Its subject matter deals with the life of an extensive landowner, ignorant, illiterate, and brutalized, and his economic slaves of the same mental calibre. The influence of wealth, both on the victims who created it and the possessor thereof, is shown in the most vivid colours, as resulting in drunkenness, idiocy, and decay. But the most striking feature of For Sonnenaufgang, the one which brought a shower of abuse on Hauptmann's head, was the question as to the indiscriminate breeding of children by unfit parents. During the second performance of the play, a leading Berlin surgeon almost caused a panic in the theatre by swinging a pair of forceps over his head and screaming at the top of his voice, "The decency and morality of Germany are at stake if childbirth is to be discussed openly from the stage." The surgeon is forgotten, and Hauptmann stands a colossal figure before the world. When Die Weber first saw the light, pandemonium broke out in the land of thinkers and poets. "What?" cried the moralists. "Working men, dirty, filthy slaves, to be put on the stage? Poverty, in all its horrors and ugliness, to be dished out as an after-dinner amusement? That is too much." Indeed, it was too much for the fat and greasy bourgeoisie to be brought face to face with the horrors of the weaver's existence. It was too much because of the truth and reality that rang like thunder in the deaf ears of self-satisfied society. J'accuse. Of course, It was generally known, even before the appearance of this drama, that capital cannot get fat unless it devours labour, that wealth cannot be hoarded except through the channels of poverty, hunger, and cold. But such things are better kept in the dark, lest the victims awaken to a realization of their position. But it is the purpose of the modern drama to rouse the consciousness of the oppressed, and that indeed was the purpose of Gerhard Hauptmann in depicting to the world the conditions of the weavers in Silesia. Human beings working 18 hours daily, yet not earning enough for bread and fuel. Human beings living in broken, wretched huts, half covered with snow, and nothing but tatters to protect them from the cold. Infants covered with scurvy from hunger and exposure. Pregnant women in the last stages of consumption. Victims of a benevolent Christian era, without life, without hope, without warmth. Ah, yes, it was too much. Hauptmann's dramatic versatility deals with every stratum of social life. Besides portraying the grinding effect of economic conditions, he also treats of the struggle of the individual for his mental and spiritual liberation from the slavery of convention and tradition. Thus Heinrich, the bell forger, in the dramatic prose poem Die Versunken Glüche, fails to reach the mountain peaks of liberty, because, as Rautendullen said, he had lived in the valley too long. Similarly, Dr. Vockerath and Anna Maar remain lonely souls, because they too lack the strength to defy venerated traditions. Yet their very failure must awaken the rebellious spirit against a world forever hindering individual and social emancipation. Max Halber's Jugend and Wedekind's Frühlingserwachen are dramas which have disseminated radical thought in an altogether different direction. They treat of the child and the dense ignorance and narrow puritanism that meet the awakening of nature. Particularly this is true of Frühlingserwachen, young boys and girls sacrificed on the altar of false education and of our sickening morality that prohibits the enlightenment of youth as to questions so imperative to the health and well-being of society, the origin of life and its functions. It shows how a mother, and a truly good mother at that, keeps her 14-year-old daughter in absolute ignorance as to all matters of sex, and when finally the young girl falls a victim to her own ignorance, the same mother sees her daughter killed by quack medicines. The inscription on her grave states that she died of anemia, and morality is satisfied. The fatality of our puritanic hypocrisy in these matters is especially illumined by Wedekind, in so far as our most promising children fall victims to sex ignorance, and the utter lack of appreciation on the part of the teachers of the child's awakening. Wendler, unusually developed and alert for her age, pleads with her mother to explain the mystery of life. "I have a sister who has been married for 2.5 years. I myself have been made an aunt for the 3rd time, and I haven't the least idea how it all comes about. Don't be cross, mother dear. Whom in the world should I ask but you? Don't scold me for asking about it. Give me an answer. How does it happen? You cannot really deceive yourself that I, who am 14 years old, still believe in the stork." Were her mother herself not a victim of false notions of morality, an affectionate and sensible explanation might have saved her daughter. But the conventional mother seeks to hide her moral shame and embarrassment in this evasive reply: "In order to have a child, one must love the man to whom one is married. One must love him, Wendler, as you at your age are still unable to love. Now you know it." How much Wendler knew, the mother realized too late. The pregnant girl imagines herself ill with dropsy, and when her mother cries in desperation, "You haven't the dropsy, you have a child, girl," the agonized Wendler exclaims in bewilderment, "But it's not possible, mother. I'm not married yet. Oh, mother, why didn't you tell me everything?" With equal stupidity, the boy Maurice is driven to suicide because he fails in his school examinations, and Melchior, the youthful father of Wendler's unborn child, is sent to the house of correction, his early sexual awakening stamping him a degenerate in the eyes of teachers and parents. For years thoughtful men and women in Germany had advocated the compelling necessity of sex enlightenment. Mutterschutz, a publication specially devoted to frank and intelligent discussion of the sex problem, has been carrying on its agitation for a considerable time. But it remained for the dramatic genius of Wedekind to influence radical thought to the extent of forcing the introduction of sex physiology in many schools of Germany. Scandinavia, like Germany, was advanced through the drama much more than through any other channel. Long before Ibsen appeared on the scene, Björnson, the great essayist, thundered against the inequalities and injustice prevalent in those countries, but his was a voice in the wilderness, reaching but the few. Not so with Ibsen. His Brand, Doll's House, Pillars of Society, Ghosts, and An Enemy of the People have considerably undermined the old conceptions and replaced them by a modern and real view of life. One has but to read Brand to realise the modern conception, let us say, of religion. Religion as an ideal to be achieved on earth. Religion as a principle of human brotherhood, of solidarity and kindness. Ibsen, the supreme hater of all social shams, has torn the veil of hypocrisy from their faces. His greatest onslaught, however, is on the four cardinal points supporting the flimsy network of society. First, the lie upon which rests the life of today. Second, the futility of sacrifice, as preached by our moral codes. Third, petty material consideration, which is the only god the majority worships. And fourth, the deadening influence of provincialism. These four recur as the leitmotif in Ibsen's plays, but particularly in Pillars of Society, Doll's House, Ghosts, and An Enemy of the People. Pillars of Society. What a tremendous indictment against the social structure that rests on rotten and decayed pillars. Pillars nicely gilded and apparently intact, yet merely hiding their true condition. And what are these pillars? Consul Bernick, at the very height of his social and financial career, the benefactor of his town and the strongest pillar of the community, has reached the summit through the channel of lies, deception, and fraud. He has robbed his bosom friend, Johann, of his good name, and has betrayed Lona Hessel, the woman he loved, to marry her stepsister for the sake of her money. He has enriched himself by shady transactions under cover of the community's good, and finally even goes to the extent of endangering human life by preparing the Indian girl, a rotten and dangerous vessel, to go to sea. But the return of Lona brings him the realization of the emptiness and meanness of his narrow life. He seeks to placate the waking consciousness by the hope that he has cleared the ground for the better life of his son, of the new generation. But even this last hope soon falls to the ground, as he realizes that truth cannot be built on a lie. At the very moment when the whole town is prepared to celebrate the great benefactor of the community with banquet praise, he himself, now grown to full spiritual manhood, confesses to the assembled townspeople, "I have no right to this homage. My fellow citizens must know me to the core. Then let everyone examine himself, and let us realize the prediction that from this event we begin a new time. The old, with its tinsel, its hypocrisy, its hollowness, its lying propriety, and its pitiful cowardice, shall lie behind us like a museum, open for instruction." With A Doll's House, Ibsen has paved the way for woman's emancipation. Nora awakens from her doll's role to the realization of the injustice done her by her father and her husband, Helmer Torvald. "While I was at home with father, he used to tell me all his opinions, and I held the same opinions. If I had others, I concealed them, because he would not have approved. He used to call me his doll child, and play with me as I played with my dolls. Then I came to live in your house. You settled everything according to your taste, and I got the same taste as you, or I pretended to. When I look back on it now, I seem to have been living like a beggar, from hand to mouth. I lived by performing tricks for you, Torvald. You and father have done me a great wrong." In vain Helmer uses the old Philistine arguments, wifely duty and social obligations. Nora has grown out of her doll's dress into full stature of conscious womanhood. She is determined to think and judge for herself. She has realized that before all else she is a human being owing the first duty to herself. She is undaunted even by the possibility of social ostracism. She has become sceptical of the justice of the law, the wisdom of the constituted. Her rebelling soul rises in protest against the existing. In her own words, "I must make up my mind which is right, society or I." In her childlike faith in her husband she had hoped for the great miracle, but it was not the disappointed hope that opened her vision to the falsehoods of marriage. It was rather the smug contentment of Helmer with a safe lie, one that would remain hidden and not endanger his social standing. When Nora closed behind her the door of her gilded cage, and went out into the world, a new, regenerated personality, she opened the gate of freedom and truth for her own sex and the race to come. More than any other play, Ghosts has acted like a bomb explosion, shaking the social structure to its very foundations. In Doll's House, the justification of the union between Nora and Helmer rested at least on the husband's conception of integrity and rigid adherence to our social morality. Indeed, he was the conventional, ideal husband and devoted father. Not so in Ghosts. Mrs. Alving married Captain Alving only to find that he was a physical and mental wreck, and that life with him would mean utter degradation and be fatal to possible offspring. In her despair she turned to her youth's companion, young Pastor Manders, who, as the true saviour of souls for heaven, must needs be indifferent to earthly necessities. He sent her back to shame and degradation, to her duties to husband and home. Indeed, happiness, to him, was but the unholy manifestation of a rebellious spirit, and a wife's duty was not to judge, but to bear with humility the cross which a higher power had for your own good laid upon you. Mrs. Alving bore the cross for 26 long years, not for the sake of the higher power, but for her little son Oswald, whom she longed to save from the poisonous atmosphere of her husband's home. It was also for the sake of the beloved son that she supported the lie of his father's goodness, in superstitious awe of duty and decency. She learned, alas, too late, that the sacrifice of her entire life had been in vain, and that her son Oswald was visited by the sins of his father, that he was irrevocably doomed. This too she learned, that we are all of us ghosts. It is not only what we have learned, what we have inherited from our father and the mother, that walks in us. It is all sorts of dead ideas and lifeless old beliefs. They have no vitality, but they cling to us all the same, and we can't get rid of them. And then we are one and all so pitifully afraid of light. When you forced me under the yoke you called duty and obligation, when you praised as right and proper what my whole soul rebelled against as something loathsome, it was then that I began to look into the seams of your doctrine. I only wished to pick at a single knot, but when I had got that undone, the whole thing ravelled out, and then I understood that it was all machine-sewn. How could a society machine-sewn fathom the seething depths whence issued the great masterpiece of Heinrich Ibsen? It could not understand, and therefore it poured the vials of abuse and venom upon its greatest benefactor. That Ibsen was not daunted he has proved by his reply in An Enemy of the People. In that great drama Ibsen performs the last funeral rites over a decaying and dying social system. Out of its ashes rises the regenerated individual, the bold and daring rebel. Dr. Stockmann, an idealist, full of social sympathy and solidarity, is called to his native town as the physician of the baths. He soon discovers that the latter are built on a swamp, and that instead of finding relief, the patients who flock to the place are being poisoned. An honest man of strong convictions, the doctor considers it his duty to make his discovery known. But he soon learns that dividends and profits are concerned neither with health nor principles. Even the reformers of the town, represented in The People's Messenger, always ready to prate of their devotion to the people, withdraw their support from the reckless idealist the moment they learn that the doctor's discovery may bring the town into disrepute and thus injure their pockets. But Dr. Stockman continues in the faith he entertains for his townsmen. They would hear him, but here too he soon finds himself alone. He cannot even secure a place to proclaim his great truth, and when he finally succeeds, he is overwhelmed by abuse and ridicule as the enemy of the people. The doctor, so enthusiastic of his townspeople's assistance to eradicate the evil, is soon driven to a solitary position. The announcement of his discovery would result in a pecuniary loss to the town, and that consideration induces the officials, the good citizens, and soul reformers to stifle the voice of truth. He finds them all a compact majority, unscrupulous enough to be willing to build up the prosperity of the town on a quagmire of lies and fraud. He is accused of trying to ruin the community, but to his mind it does not matter if a lying community is ruined. It must be levelled to the ground. All men who live upon lies must be exterminated like vermin. You'll bring it to such a pass that the whole country will deserve to perish. Dr. Stockman is not a practical politician. A free man, he thinks, must not behave like a blackguard. He must not so act that he would spit in his own face, for only cowards permit considerations of pretended general welfare or of party to override truth and ideals. Party programmes wring the necks of all young living truths, and considerations of expediency turn morality and righteousness upside down, until life is simply hideous. These plays of Ibsen, The Pillars of Society, A Doll's House, Ghosts, and An Enemy of the People, constitute a dynamic force which is gradually dissipating the ghosts walking the social burying ground called civilization. Nay, more, Ibsen's destructive effects are at the same time supremely constructive, for he not merely undermines existing pillars, indeed he builds with sure strokes the foundation of a healthier, ideal future, based on the sovereignty of the individual within a sympathetic social environment. England, with her great pioneers of radical thought, the intellectual pilgrims like Godwin, Robert Owen, Darwin, Spencer, William Morris, and scores of others, with her wonderful larks of liberty, Shelley, Byron, Keats, is another example of the influence of dramatic art. Within comparatively a few years, the dramatic works of Shaw, Pinero, Galsworthy, Rann Kennedy have carried radical thought to the ears formerly deaf, even to Great Britain's wondrous poets. Thus, a public which will remain indifferent reading an essay by Robert Owen on poverty, or ignore Bernard Shaw's socialistic tracts, was made to think by Major Barbara, wherein poverty is described as the greatest crime of Christian civilization. Poverty makes people weak, slavish, puny. Poverty creates disease, crime, prostitution. In fine, poverty is responsible for all the ills and evils of the world. Poverty also necessitates dependency, charitable organisations, institutions that thrive off the very thing they are trying to destroy. The Salvation Army, for instance, as shown in Major Barbara, fights drunkenness, yet one of its greatest contributors is Badger, a whisky distiller, who furnishes yearly thousands of pounds to do away with the very source of his wealth. Bernard Shaw, therefore, concludes that the only real benefactor of society is a man like Undershaft, Barbara's father, a cannon manufacturer, whose theory of life is that powder is stronger than words. "The worst of crimes," says Undershaft, "is poverty. All the other crimes are virtues beside it. All the other crimes are virtues beside it. All the other dishonours are chivalry itself by comparison. Poverty blights whole cities, spreads horrible pestilences, strikes dead the very soul of all who come within sight, sound, or smell of it. What you call crime is nothing. A murder here, a theft there, a blow now and a curse there. What do they matter? They're only the accidents and illnesses of life. There are not 50 genuine professional criminals in London, but there are millions of poor people, abject people, dirty people, ill-fed, ill-clothed people. They poison us morally and physically. They kill the happiness of society. They force us to do away with our own liberties and to organise unnatural cruelties, for fear they should rise against us and drag us down into their abyss. Poverty and slavery have stood up for centuries to your sermons and leading articles. They will not stand up to my machine guns. Don't preach at them. Don't reason with them. Kill them. It is a final test of conviction, the only lever strong enough to overturn a social system. Vote. Bah! When you vote, you only change the name of the cabinet. When you shoot, you pull down governments, inaugurate new epochs, abolish old orders, and set up new. No wonder people cared little to read Mr. Shaw's socialistic tracts. In no other way but in the drama could he deliver such forcible historic truths, and therefore it is only through the drama that Mr. Shaw is a revolutionary factor in the dissemination of radical ideas. After Hauptmann die Weber, Strife by Galsworthy is the most important labour drama. The theme of Strife is a strike with two dominant factors: Antony, the president of the company, rigid, uncompromising, unwilling to make the slightest concession, although the men held out for months and are in a condition of semi-starvation, and David Roberts, an uncompromising revolutionist, whose devotion to the working man and the cause of freedom is at white heat. Between them the strikers are worn and weary with the terrible struggle, and are harassed and driven by the awful sight of poverty and want in their families. The most marvellous and brilliant piece of work in Strife is Galsworthy's portrayal of the mob, its fickleness and lack of backbone. One moment they applaud old Thomas, who speaks of the power of God and religion and admonishes the men against rebellion. The next instant they are carried away by a walking delegate who pleads the cause of the Union that always stands for compromise, and which forsakes the working man whenever they dare to strike for independent demands. Again, they are aglow with the earnestness, the spirit, and the intensity of David Roberts. All these people willing to go in whatever direction the wind blows. It is the curse of the working class that they always follow like sheep led to slaughter. Consistency is the greatest crime of our commercial age. No matter how intense the spirit or how important the man, the moment he will not allow himself to be used or sell his principles, he is thrown on the dust heap. Such was the fate of the president of the company, Antony, and of David Roberts. To be sure, they represented opposite poles, poles antagonistic to each other, poles divided by a terrible gap that can never be bridged over, yet they shared a common fate. Antony is the embodiment of conservatism, of old ideas, of iron methods. I have been chairman of this company 32 years. I have fought the men 4 times. I have never been defeated. It has been said that times have changed. If they have, I have not changed with them. It has been said that masters and men are equal. Cant. There can be only one master in a house. It has been said that capital and labour have the same interests. Cant. Their interests are as wide asunder as the poles. There is only one way of treating men, with the iron rod. Masters are masters, men are men. We may not like this adherence to old reactionary notions, and yet there is something admirable in the courage and consistency of this man. Nor is he half as dangerous to the interests of the oppressed as our sentimental and soft reformers, who rob with 9 fingers and give liberties with the 10th, who grind human beings like Russell Sage, and then spend millions of dollars in social research work, who turn beautiful young plants into faded old women, and then give them a few paltry dollars, or found a home for working girls. Antony is a worthy foe, and to fight such a foe one must learn to meet him in open battle. David Roberts has all the mental and moral attributes of his adversary, coupled with the spirit of revolt and the depth of modern ideas. He too is consistent, and wants nothing for his class short of complete victory. It is not for this little moment of time we're fighting, not for our own little bodies and their warmth. It is for all those who come after, for all times. Oh, men, for the love of them, don't turn up another stone on their heads. Don't help to blacken the sky. If we can shake that white-faced monster with the bloody lips that has sucked the lives out of ourselves, our wives, and our children since the world began, if we have not the hearts of men to stand against it, breast to breast and eye to eye, and force it backwards till it cry for mercy, it will go on sucking life, and we shall stay for ever where we are, less than the very dogs. It is inevitable that compromise and petty interest should pass on and leave 2 such giants behind. inevitable, until the mass will reach the stature of a David Roberts. Will it ever? Prophecy is not the vocation of the dramatist, yet the moral lesson is evident. One cannot help realising that the working men will have to use methods hitherto unfamiliar to them, that they will have to discard all those elements in their midst that are forever ready to reconcile the irreconcilable, namely, capital and labour. They will have to learn that characters like David Roberts are the very forces that have revolutionised the world, and thus paved the way for emancipation out of the clutches of that white-faced monster with bloody lips, towards a brighter horizon, a freer life, and a deeper recognition of human values. End of section 1 of chapter 12.